Hello, and welcome to the Innovation Women Speak webinar series. My name is Bobby Carlton, and I am the founder of Innovation Women. Innovation Women is a visibility bureau for entrepreneurial, technical, and professional women. We connect female speakers with speaking opportunities, and we connect event managers with female speakers. Our mission is to eliminate the all-male, all-pale conferences and events. Unlike a traditional speakers bureau, our goal is gender-balanced conferences and events. It's so much more than a traditional speakers bureau. Event managers can find the speakers, and speakers can find the speaking engagements and other speaking and visibility opportunities. And you know that question we all get, do you know other women who can speak on our panel? Well, at last, the answer is yes. Speakers can also invite other speakers, and we just rolled out some new capabilities on the site. Now you can apply for opportunities right on innovationwomen.com. So if you are interested in becoming an Innovation Women speaker, the membership is simply $100 a year, and it includes all of the following features. You get a profile visible to event managers, a weekly newsletter with speaking opportunities, opportunities to be a guest speaker on our webinar series, just like today, access to speaker resources, and if you're an author, we have a special promotional program for you. We promote authors on our Amazon store, and we promote the books that you're writing. We also do a lot of social media promotion of your upcoming speaking engagements. So as I mentioned earlier, we have some new website updates. We're making it even easier for event managers to connect with speakers and vice versa. You also have a dashboard that allows you to manage your applications and invitations all in one place. If you're interested in learning more about Innovation Women, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter. Here's a bit.ly/IW sign up, and the I, the W, and the S are all capital letters. Or you can text INNO to 22828. If you sign up for Innovation Women before midnight tonight, you can use our promo code IW Webinar, again, all in capital letters for 20% off. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a webinar series, and next week, Dr. Sean Andrews will be joining us to discuss the gender tipping point, women, emotional intelligence, and leadership in the workplace. That's June 26th, noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, getting into today's webinar, this is an annotated version of your screen. Below the video viewing tab, there are a few tabs. The default tab is to ask a question. You can type in a question at any time during the program. There's also a tab called Rate This. It helps us determine what you like. We read all the feedback, so feel free to let us know what you think. And there's also a tab for attachments. And you'll see links in there and attachments so that you'll be able to download any information or get links off to websites that our speaker talks about. You can also enlarge your screen mode, and if at any time you need audio help, feel free to click on the Help button at the bottom of the screen. One more thing, the webinar is being recorded, and following this live portion, we'll be sending you a link to the recording. And now, Candace Benson from Benson Consulting is joining us to discuss the gig economy and how it has changed how we manage projects. Candace is an internationally recognized management consultant and the CEO of Benson Consulting, Inc. For more than 15 years, she's been instrumental in successfully leading companies at all levels to operational excellence, leading to great profit. She has led highly complex workflow, process, and back-end optimization projects for Fortune 50 companies, including several major mergers and acquisitions. And her true passion is bringing this expertise to companies of all sizes, as she knows the benefit that a focus on operational excellence can bring. Most recently, her company has launched the Diversify Thinking Initiative, working with organizations to implement change in their culture to increase diversity of thought. Candace also sits on the board of the New Hampshire Tech Alliance and is the chairperson of the Tech Women, Tech Girls Initiative. So, welcome, Candace.
Thank you so much, Bobby. I'm so excited to be here and really excited to have an opportunity today to share with all of you some of the insights that I over 15 years, as Bobby mentioned, in growing events and consulting, and also that I see coming based on where we are in our current economy and the way that I see organizations shifting the way that they work with employees as well as with independent consultants. So super excited to be here and share that with you. So the first thing I'd like to start with actually is a question for each of you. And you can either pop an answer or yes or a no into the feedback section if you'd like, or simply just consider this to yourself is, when was the last time that you worked on your team or either had responsibility over managing an independent consultant in your organization, and what was that experience like? Was it a poor experience? Did you have bumps along the way, either in bringing that individual into the company or in the way that they worked with your team once they got there? Oftentimes, if you think about that, we find that that is the case because organizations haven't prepared themselves to really work with those individuals and haven't prepared their teams adequately to optimize that relationship. So what we want to talk about today, and I'm hoping that you all can walk away with some really tangible activities that you can take back to your office. The first is, what are the challenges and opportunities that exist today with independent workers? Who is available out there? Does it apply to you? What experiences might you expect to have as you're working with those individuals? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the most important considerations and processes that I truly believe that if you put into place will help your organization optimize the output that you have from your teams as we move forward into this economy that is growing rapidly by the use of independent workers. And then lastly, a proven system that I have used throughout the years to make sure that my clients and the companies that I work with really can win that war on talent and get the folks that they need in the right place at the right time. So we're going to talk about those things today. So I always like to start with a little bit of my why. So if you're seeing the screen right now, you see my 3 beautiful babies up there. And really the reason that I started in consulting way back before they joined my life was that I wanted to have the freedom, honestly, to work when I wanted to work, choose the type of projects that really lit my heart on fire, and companies that I really felt were doing something in the world that was important. And so I wanted to be able to have that opportunity and make those decisions. And so that was why I had stepped into the world of consulting. And since my daughters have come into the world, it even strengthens that for me in terms of my why I choose to continue to have that flexibility. And now it actually has taken on an even more special meaning to me in that having the ability to show them what it's like to be a woman CEO, what it's like to grow a business, but still be a really strong mom for them. And so that every day is really what drives me and is my why for my business and all the work that I do in the world. So how did I get here? Important question. So I had the unique opportunity when I was just a really young green project manager to work in probably what I would say is one of the most complex mergers in the financial industry, which was the combination of Chase and JP Morgan. So of course now we know as JP Morgan Chase. At the time I would say it was an immersion into probably one of the most complicated change management initiatives that I have been part of in my now almost 20 years of running projects. But the wonderful thing about that opportunity is that it gave me a chance to see how important the people are in the changes that we implement inside of our organization. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is really about the people management as much as it is about the project management, because if we don't stop and consider the people and how the changes we're implementing in our organizations are impacting those people, then we're truly not doing a great job as managers and leaders inside those organizations. So I had the opportunity, as I mentioned, to work on that merger for actually a little over 3 years. It was a very long process, as you can imagine, to build everything up and then look at everything and then take everything apart and make sure we ended up with, sort of one set of systems that would run that that very large bank at that point with lots of products and services. So I left JP Morgan Chase after, like I said, almost 4 years, and I had the opportunity to go out on my own and start consulting at another financial institution. And at that point, I sort of left the independent contractor status and started my own boutique organization. And so now today we have grown into a boutique change management and project implementation agency. And what that means is that we offer strategy, planning, and implementation of change initiatives or programs to organizations. We also can staff project managers for an extra set of hands. So we're going to talk a little bit about why you may need that in your organization as well as we go forward. And then lastly, which I am sure as we go through the slides you're going to get a taste of from what I'm sharing with you, is that we have a real passion behind helping organizations set really strong process foundations in their organization to help either their project management office or their functional teams, if the PMs are embedded in those teams, or just their organization as a whole to make sure that they truly are being thoughtful and as effective as they can be as an organization. So one of the first challenges that I would like to talk through is being able to find the right types of individuals. Right now, in case you haven't been watching the news over the last couple of months, we have added over 338,000 new jobs over the last 2 months into our economy, and our unemployment rate has stayed pretty steady at 3.6%. And while there are some experts out there that are saying we expect to see some slowdown in that growth, even with that, the result of all of these new jobs, all of this new opportunity, is that companies are really moving at a frenetic pace. I'm sure that all of you have experience with your management expecting there's going to be more done in less time with less people. That's really the reality that we see in most cases inside companies today. And so an additional result of that is that they're also fighting an ongoing talent war. Because there are so many opportunities, resources, especially those that are really good at what they do, they really can pick and choose where they want to work and what projects they want to be on and what organization they're going to spend their time in. So it's getting harder and harder for organizations to really find the right folks. And so what they're doing is turning to consultants and freelance workers to make sure that they can get the people into those projects and into those change initiatives when they need them. But according to a recent Deloitte study, even with this, and even knowing that this has been coming and we see this change in organizations, surveys of organizations show that less than 20% of leadership teams in organizations say that they're really ready to incorporate more independent workers into their workforce. So if you're asking how does this apply to your company, I wanted to share a few ways that we see independent workers really getting embedded into the teams of the companies that we're working with. So the first is from a regulatory perspective, or the need for some new compliance or standard. A good example of this might be GDPR that we recently saw coming out of Europe, and that forced actually a lot of organizations, including a lot of organizations here in the US, to implement new regulatory standards around privacy. And so we saw a lot of organizations have to step up and bring on temporary project teams just to help them implement those changes because they just didn't have the staff on hand to meet the timelines that were set. So that can be one example of why your organization might turn to some additional workers. The other would be Your company strategy might change. So maybe you have something you want to get out to market, or you have an idea and you want to test out to see if it's something that your target audience would purchase. And really, you have to have a certain technical expertise, or maybe it's that you need market expertise. You need someone to come in and really do some research out in the market to find out if the product or service you're looking to sell is something that someone is going to want to buy. And so you might not have that internal knowledge or expertise, and so you might bring someone in to do that as well. The third way we see organizations bringing in independent consultants is when they need turnaround within the company. So what do I mean by that is, they're not performing at the highest capability, right? And so the leadership team, or some cases a board, if that's applicable, might say, hey, we really need to bring in an individual that we've seen turn around other organizations. And so many of you might be familiar with that concept that there are turnaround CEOs, for example, who will stay at an organization for 3 years, 4 years, and really their job there is to turn that organization around. And I was lucky enough over the last couple of years to work with an organization that was in this situation. So they brought in a turnaround CEO, and they brought our team in to actually help create the foundation for how they managed projects, because they saw that as one of the gaps and weaknesses in terms of how they were working and interacting with their clients. So we were brought in to help that turnaround CEO really create that basic hygiene, right? How do we make sure every day we're doing those things that are repeatable and make us most efficient? So that's certainly another example that we see a lot of, either in turnaround situations when it's a little more severe, or as organizations just start to recognize that they have some of those gaps. And then the last one here is speed to market. So this really could be anything that's coming out of your organization and you really want to be able to turn it around quickly. Sometimes that's a longer term project. Sometimes that's something that is a technology that you're looking to release. And really in this instance, what we see is probably less of the more skilled expertise, but more of the staff aug situation where maybe you just need an extra set of hands to come in and help you sort of knock that out and get it off of your plate. So I talked about, of course, some of the reasons it's critical to work with independent consultants or freelance workers, basically because you just need the talent, right? That's more on a needs basis. But there are also other benefits that organizations can consider when they're working with independent workers as well. So one is around cost efficiencies. So we all know when you hire an independent consultant, you don't have to give them benefits. You're not paying for their vacation, right? There's a lot of ways that it's cost effective for an organization to work with a consultant versus working with someone or bringing someone on full time. It could also be that there's a large amount of work right at this moment, but we can't foresee that work will sustain itself in the organization for a longer period of time in the future. And so versus bringing on someone full time and now having that on the payroll that you have to sustain, they can bring in a consultant and just be very clear with them on the timeline, right, that we need you for this period of time, and once that work slows down, then we're not going to need your services anymore. So it creates that from an efficiency standpoint on the pricing. The second, and one that's clearly dear to my heart, you heard Bobby say that I do a lot of work around diversity within our organizations. I've led for over 4 years now an organization that specifically focuses on women in technology, and now very important for me to start to help organizations see how they can start to bring all those different groups back together to have some of those uncomfortable conversations around diversity and how we make change inside of our companies. And really why this is important is because as you have greater diversity on your team, you're going to have better ideas. You're going to have more options in terms of solutioning. And when I say diversity here, I want to be clear in that it's not just gender diversity, it's not just racial diversity, really it's team diversity as a whole. So what does that mean? Maybe it's people from different industries and backgrounds. Maybe it's age diversity, so getting folks that had a lot of experience in certain areas. I think one of the big myths actually from the independent workforce perspective is that it's dominated by millennials, and we've actually seen that is not the case. There are a lot of independent consultants and freelance workers that go across all of the generations. And so that's something we like to highlight and make sure that organizations are thinking about that there's skill sets at every level that you can bring in. So the third reason, clearly, as I mentioned, is that they have a broader experience or skill set sometimes around the thing that you're trying to implement. So rather than investing in someone on your team getting up to speed on a particular software that you're only going to use to implement a project, for example, you can bring someone from the outside that might already have that skill set. And the fourth reason related to that it's really a benefit is that you have a quicker time to scaling, because that individual is going to come in and they already have enough of that background and they've done it before, so they can bring industry best practices into your organization and help you and your team that's there full-time be able to get up to speed more quickly, because they can share their knowledge with you as well, but also you have someone that's driving that project forward for you. So what is our current state of opportunities out there? There's also a lot of independent workers out there. Recent studies from McKinsey show that there's over 162 million independent workers between the United States and Europe. And they can kind of be broken into a couple of different buckets. Preferred choice workers make up about 70% of that number. Those are individuals that for the time being right now, they're choosing to be a consultant. They may have had opportunities to work full-time, but they're seeing opportunities that are better for their situation right now as a consultant or an independent worker. So they're going in that direction. And about 30% of that number is really what they referred to in that study as free agents. So someone like myself that has chosen, their full company is consulting, right? So there's not just making a choice for the moment, but they've made sort of that longer term decision to stay as a free agent, as it were. So the summary of that is really that it's getting harder to find and retain excellent workers. That's both on the full-time side as well as what we're starting to see in the gig economy, because there's so much competition out there. It's getting even tougher to find them. And then it's also what we're seeing is those, of course, that are in the highest demand are the ones that have the most experience and the best expertise. So we're going to talk a little bit later about how you can make sure that you can win that talent war in terms of finding those individuals and what we've found to really be successful both for ourselves and our clients as we go forward. But how do we make sure that you can optimize those top performers once you do have them in your organization? As I mentioned before, our team is a big believer in process and continuous improvement. So one of the first areas that we always focus on with our clients is around onboarding. So what do you really need to do to make sure you have a strong process in onboarding that's going to get those people in the door fast and make sure they can get working for you and make sure you're getting the value very quickly? So the first thing is a skills mapping. So if you don't know in your organization what skills you actually have in the organization, it's very hard to identify the skills you need to fill with an independent consultant. Unfortunately, this is probably one of the things we see the most often in companies. There certainly are some privacy questions around, who can share resume details from employees that you have already and that sort of thing. But you can use certain methods to get a skills mapping completed without crossing any of those barriers. And so that's something that we always instruct, organizations to start with, because if you don't know what you need or what you have, then you can't know what you need, right? So you can't be successful in that. The second, if you want to really attract high performers, is have a culture built on flexibility. If the job that you're bringing them in to do doesn't require them to be tied to a desk, don't make them be tied to a desk. I know for myself, anytime I work with a lot of different clients, and sometimes, when I go into their office, they, make a space for me to be there for the day. And if I'm sitting in a cubicle, I have to tell you, my creativity just tanks out. I'm just not good in a cubicle. And so that's different for every person, clearly, in terms of what motivates them and where they work the best. But just be open to that. If you really want to have the best performers coming to you and wanting to work with your organization, you have to be flexible in terms of where they need to be and what work they're going to be doing. The other thing you definitely need is documented agreements and expectations. So certainly I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, so you have to check with your legal professionals, but make sure that you have solid contracts with these folks that in addition to all the legalities, you're also being very clear on what the expectations are. What are the deliverables that you're expecting to see from them, and the timelines around that. So that will make sure that you're getting the most out of your work with these individuals, and they also feel like you're an organization that is very upfront with them. You're being honest about what you need, and they know they can be successful because they have a clear map in terms of what it is that they need to deliver for you. And then finally here around onboarding is have a strategy and a streamlined process around how you hire. This is also a gap with full-time employment, clearly, as we know, and I'm sure in some of your organizations this is really a pain point. But so often we see organizations that really don't have a strategy about how they do interviews, for example. One thing that we always stress is if you're bringing in a consultant that's going to work with you on a strategic project, ask them the same questions you would ask a full-time employee. They need to fit into your culture. They need to fit into your organization. They're going to be working alongside your team. So don't bypass that effective screening that you might do for your full-time folks. You should really have one process that's documented, that everyone understands, what gets you the best results in that process, and then use that when you're working with independent consultants as well. One of the biggest challenges we see once we bring consultants into organizations is really making sure that there's a clear process at the management level for integrating those individuals into your team. One of the things that we find most often is that companies aren't the best at having open and honest communication. You probably find that that's true in a lot of other ways in your companies, but specifically too as it relates to bringing in supplemental work for your team. We hear from individuals with inside companies because I'm often asking them, how is the experience going? How are they feeling on the team as well as the full-time workers? Because I really like to understand how that integration feels for them when you're bringing in consultants to the team. And oftentimes they will say that, it's frustrating when they don't know why an individual is getting brought in. And I think sometimes we forget that there's that whole concept of if people don't know a reason, they make up a reason. And sometimes the story is worse than the truth, right? So we need to make sure as organizations, as leaders in those companies, that we're saying, hey, this is the reason we're doing this. We're bringing in this individual because they have X or Y skill, or because we have a bandwidth issue and we just need to have some additional support. Whatever that is, just be open and honest so that those employees you have on your team, there's not a tension from the moment that person comes in, because then they're going to be less likely to work well together, and it's going to take you longer, as we mentioned, to get that value-added work out of them. You also want to stay really focused on the work product. As I talked about in the last slide, making sure that you're very clear on what those deliverables are, and especially for an independent contractor or consultant, it really should be focused on the timeline. So we all know, if you've worked on projects at all, you all know the timeline is somewhat of a myth sometimes, right? If you're in a non-agile organization and you create a project plan, that project plan is not going to last, right? You're going to change that thing probably a million times, or at least that's generally the experience that we see happening. And so make sure that it's very clear to you and your team what the availability of this individual is that you're bringing in. So it does require you to have a much more consistent focus on estimating the amount of time it's going to take for work to get done, and then really sticking to that timeline, because that consultant may already be committed to go on to another project at a certain point based on their agreement with you. And so you want to make sure that you're not stuck in a lurch with that individual having to leave you before the project gets completed. And if the estimation is a hard part of the work to get done, ask those consultants you're bringing in, because in some cases they've learned those best practices from other organizations too on how to really do a good job in estimating that. I think another thing that really pulls in the top performers from a consultant's perspective is making sure they have challenging work that's making a difference. What I mean by that is not necessarily that you have to be doing a project that is saving the earth, right? We're not every project we do in companies is mission-driven projects. We have to do some work that is day-to-day. but showing them that the work that you're bringing them in to work on is going to make a difference, and making it clear to them what the overall objective is and what the leadership team is trying to get completed. If they have that bigger vision from you, it's much easier for them, quite honestly, to help also provide strategy in some cases on how to move forward if they understand what that larger objective is. But sometimes I think we handcuff workers that we bring in because we don't share with them the ultimate goal, right? You just give them sort of the more tactical day-to-day things, and you're not able to get the most value, and that's certainly not a project that a top-performing consultant is going to want to stay in and work in. And then the last one here is really to be intentional about integrating individuals into your team and ensuring they know the ways of working at your organization. So we had an organization that we spoke to, and they shared with us some of the things they were doing, which were really exciting, and they sort of called it their ways of working boot camp. But what they did to make sure that those consultants could get up and running as quickly as possible, and they're an organization, by the way, that is already primarily consultant-based, and they're a large global organization, and they, not a consulting firm, but their team members are made up mostly of consultants. They train those individuals within the first week they're there via video training. So they have been very intentional and thoughtful about what are the things that these individuals are going to need to know. And they've had those recorded, first of all, looking at, what are the day-to-day tools that you use that individuals are going to need to be aware of. So whether that's your SharePoint site, whether you're using Jira for defect tracking, whatever that system is that you're using on a regular basis, take a quick video. It also is great for your employees to have reminders sometimes if they have a question or they can't quite remember how to do something. If you have that video library of those trainings, they can easily also refer back to that. So that's super helpful in both instances. The other thing they did was training around or demos or training around the product or service that the consultants were getting brought in to work on. So whatever they had available at that point, they like to make sure that they've recorded some demos and some information so that consultant can, look at it in their time. And you're also not pulling valuable resources off of other projects to sit with them and try to brain dump everything they know about a project. So it really is the most effective way. And then they also had a mentor that they assigned to any consultant that comes into the organization. And that person is really there to make sure if they have questions, if they're not sure who to go to, if they literally just can't, find something versus them spending a number of hours kind of searching through, if they can ask their mentor and it's a quick answer, that allows that consultant to move on and be productive in that day instead of searching and you're paying for them to be there for 3 or 4 hours sort of researching something that probably is already known on the project if people have been there longer than them. So that's really something to consider in your organization. If you can think about either in video or you can also do paper training, but we find that people have so much to read already to get up to speed on projects. The videos and make that really, really easy. We also had one other client that we worked with, and this was a really cool idea, so I wanted to just share in terms of integrating. A lot of times we think about the culture and how do our teams fit together. What this particular organization did was they had what they called a water cooler drop box, because a lot of their team members were either consultants working remotely, team members working in other locations, and this Dropbox was where they encouraged everyone in the organization to put pictures of vacation, pictures of their hobbies. If they caught a great big fish that week, they would throw that in there. The great thing about that was it allowed all of those individuals on the team, regardless if they were consultants or full-time, to really feel part of a community and know more about each other. These individuals that we're working with, in some cases 8, 10, 12 hours a day, it's really nice to know a little bit more about them. And so I thought that was a really great idea too that I wanted to share. So the third area and process that is critical when you're bringing in outside help is knowledge transfer and retention of all of the information that individual is working through in your projects. So make sure that you have a documented process. Just like so many things, if we go into it and say, oh yeah, we'll do that later on in the project, we'll figure that out, after the person gets here. The problem is, and you all know, we get so busy day to day that we often don't go back and remember to do those things. And then unfortunately what happens is either we remember it too close to when the individual's, scheduled to leave the organization, and we don't have time to kind of pull everything out of them, or we forget altogether. And then a week after they're gone, we remember, oh, Jim knew that thing and we didn't ask them. And so how do we make sure that we are capturing all that information? So one of the things that we stress all the time with our clients is to make sure that you have a knowledge. How are you, whether that's through having those individuals write stuff as they go, whether it's making sure everything is shared in a shared drive, whether it's making sure you have sort of buddies on the project, so there's a couple of people always that know key things about the organization and about that specific change initiative. So just whatever that process is that works for you, and it's always customized to your organization, but make sure that you figure that out on your team and that you document it so everyone's aware. The same thing goes for the transition process. So knowledge retention can happen all throughout the project, and then that transition process is really making sure when the project is ending and those individuals are leaving, who's now owning the result of the project. Sometimes this gets overlooked, and so it's really important to make sure you've built into your plans along the way and made it clear to the consultants along the way that they really need to make sure the function within the organization that's going to own that is brought up to speed and considered as stakeholders throughout the process so that they gain all of that knowledge as you go. And then lastly, you really need technology and tools. So we have so much technology today. I think sometimes, especially in organizations where we're moving really fast or they're in an agile organization and we think, well, we can't write stuff down because we're agile. That obviously, clearly you can still write things down, and it's important for us to capture decisions that were made, why we're doing something, because we have to remember we may not always be at that organization, right? And so making sure that people who are coming after us or who are going to manage or run part of that business once that contractor leaves or that consultant leaves, that they have all the information so that they can leverage that as they go forward. So again, lots of tools in place to help you with that. I mentioned a couple already. I said SharePoint earlier, but a lot of places that you can just store things, and then there are also organizations that allow you to store items that would then even be searchable, right? There are some companies that focus specifically on that in certain markets where they want to make it real easy for their clients to find data at their fingertips. So lots of opportunities for you there. And lastly, I mentioned to you that war for talent and that need to be able to make sure that you can find the best individuals when you need them. Statistics really show us that it takes, a new resource 8 to 12 months to come up to speed once you've hired them into your organization. Clearly, for a consultant, that's going to be less of a time because, number one, they're probably used to picking things up quickly and jumping from organization to organization because that's what they do. They also probably have a more specific expertise in the area that you're working on in that project so they can come up to speed a little more quickly. But there's still going to be that gap of time in just them understanding more about your organization and what you do and the way that you work inside your organization, because that's different at every company. So we really stress, in what we have seen be successful throughout our almost 20 years of working on projects and working with organizations, is that it's really key to focus on the relationship with those top consultants that you're bringing in. If they do a really great job for you on a project, you want to make sure that you can get to them again and hopefully bring them into a project with you. So one way is really just to focus on knowing a little bit more about them, understanding the type of work that they want to be doing as well, understanding where in your organization that they might be a really great fit. I would also say that if you want to build a good relationship with a consultant and know that they're going to constantly be looking at your organization to come back into, another good way to do that is introduce them to your colleagues. If you know your colleague has a project coming up and yours is rolling, they're rolling off of your project, but there might be an opportunity for them somewhere else in the organization to make that connection. If they're a consultant that is focused on business development, they'll probably ask you for that as well. But if they don't, just be thinking of that. The other thing is if it's, sometimes it's a lot of work to pursue those relationships over time, right, and to nurture that with outreach and staying on top of where people are, because you have a day-to-day job. So another thing you can do is have a hip pocket, expert or go-to agency that can source project managers for you, or that has a really broad network, so that if there's a particular skill set you're looking for, they're your go-to. You can call them up and say, hey, listen, I don't know if you have somebody out that you've met that has this particular background in this technology, or maybe as a finance expert, whatever that is that you're looking for. Have someone that you can go to and have that relationship with them, and then they will worry about building the relationship, right, with that community of project managers or consultants that you might need to have come in. So that's our second recommendation. The third thing we've seen, actually, we've started to pilot with a couple of organizations, which is something that we're seeing some really good results with, is offering continued educational opportunities to those top consultants. So what do I mean by that? If you as an organization make a shift towards a different methodology, so you move away from running your projects in a waterfall fashion, and you're moving towards Agile, but it's a more customized version of Agile, because a lot of organizations do that, maybe it makes sense for you at a certain point, if you're going to do a big training for your organization on, hey, here's our new methodology, here's what we're rolling out, here's why, here are the things that you're going to see kind of changing in the way that we do our day-to-day work together. Invite some of those top consultants in just to sit in and listen to the changes in your methodology or the changes in your organization. What that does is a couple of things. One, it certainly is building the relationship with that top person, right? They're always going to think of you more as a partner in that case than just that, you're bringing them on as staff aug when, you get too busy, right? You want to create that relationship. So that's one reason, excuse me. But the other thing is, if you want them to be able to hit the ground running as soon as they come into the organization, this is a wonderful way for those individuals to stay up to speed on the way you work in your company. And so just inviting them in to sit and listen into that, they would really appreciate that, and you would also benefit from that greatly the next time you ask them to come in, because now they're more familiar with that already. You don't have to go through retraining them on your methodology. And then the last thing I would mention here is, again, having a set of tools or technologies that you can use to go and locate top performing consultants or freelance workers. So there's a lot of technology out there right now, a lot of companies that have started up in this space. The one that comes most to mind for me that we use here at our organization is called Catalent. They're actually a Boston-based organization, a pretty fast-growing one. I think they got 50 fastest growing tech companies in Boston recently, which is exciting, but they're a really great organization that allows you as a company to go in and create almost like an RFP that, for a job that you want to fill or a project that you need expertise on. And then as the consultant, I'm able to go in and have a profile. I can share information about my background and my company and what we do. And then they have individuals in the company that match them together, and they might reach out to me and say, hey, we got this new project, do you want to put in a bid for that? And have the company look at you and see if that might be something they want to consider. So it's a really great way to kind of speed up that process if you already know that there's an organization that's sort of doing that research for you and going through that. A couple of other ones that are similar to that, I think Upwork does something similar. Kelly is another organization, another software that does the same thing. So just be looking for, again, based on what you need, and find maybe one of those technologies that can work well for you as well, and help do some of that legwork for you, so you don't have to be doing that all for yourself. Because one of the things that I would mention is, as a manager or a leader, going forward, because of the growth that we see in the amount of independent workers coming into our organizations, part of your job most likely is going to be, finding that next resource and constantly sort of looking for the right workers to fill those gaps in your organization, especially if you move forward towards an organization that's going to be more consistently looking at gig workers or independent workers versus full-time hires. So I'm so excited I get to share all of this with you today. I really hope that you took away some of the ways that your organization fits into some of those opportunities that I shared around working with independent consultants, and really can take at least a nugget or two from what I shared around the processes that you really have to have in place. And again, make sure they're intentional. You're writing them down. everyone is communicated to about what that process is and why it's important. So we want to create any new process in our organization, and then really making sure that you are being intentional about building relationships with either an agency that can find people for you or with individuals that have come in and done a good job for you, just so that you have the opportunity to call them back when you need a top performer to come into your organization. Most importantly, take action today. I think you gave up an hour of your time today to come and hear me share this, which I am humbled by, for you to come and spend your time with us. And I want to make sure that you take something away from it. So as much as we can learn when we attend webinars like this, what's most important is that you take at least one thing from today and put it into action. And just try it. It might work for you. You might have to adjust it, but it will make sure that you can have success if you take action on that. So Bobby, I think we have a little bit of time here for some questions if you wanted to go through any questions we received.
Absolutely. So you have any questions, you can actually put those in, and Candace and I have a few minutes here to answer questions. Okay, it looks like we've got one question already. This person is asking about postmortems and lessons learned. So when you're facilitating a lessons learned, how do you make sure it doesn't get too negative?
Oh, good question. So, yeah, one of the things that we always encourage our organizations to do, especially as part of that process that we talked about for knowledge transfer and retention, if you have a postmortem, or we actually call it an after-action review, not something we coined by any means, it comes from the military, and the reason we prefer the after-action review title is because it promotes action, right? So often when we do go into lessons learned, and it's a great question because so often when we get into those situations, we do start with the kind of finger pointing or complaining, and because we often look at it and say, well, what went wrong? And we start to talk about that. But if you look at it from the perspective of, in an after action review, what was supposed to happen, very data driven, not emotional, what did happen, and what do we need to do better next time? And so it's always with that forward motion. And so sometimes I think even when we say lessons learned, it makes us feel like we need to learn something, so we mess something up. It kind of denotes starting off in that negative space. So that's one thing is I would approach it in, here are the 3 questions, and make sure all your questions are focused on the action of what we're going to do next time instead of dwelling on what happened before. The other thing is you can make sure to start off and set expectations right up front. We mentioned having open and honest conversation. That's critically important anytime you're starting a meeting as well. Make sure it's very clear what the objective is, and say to folks that what we want to come out of today with is really actionable steps towards doing our best work, on the next opportunity, and make sure that you pull it out of finger pointing or negativity if it starts to go there.
Gotcha. Our next question is, when setting up a boot camp for onboarding, how do you figure out what training to include?
Oh, good question. So I did mention some options in terms of the types of tools that you're working with every day, or if it's specifically for a project, making sure that you have a demo or something in place that shows about that particular product or service. But what we do for sure in our company, and what we suggest, is that you can look at what your specific situation is and talk to people about what's been most helpful for them when they've come into your organization, right? So talk to your staff even internally, find out from them what's super helpful, find out what types of questions they have along the way, and then maybe the next time you bring a consultant in, if you don't have something like that, ask them that as they're going through the process to make note every day of, hey, what's something that would have been super helpful for me to have in place? And so have them help you kind of create that checklist as they go the next time that they come and start a new project with you.
Okay, and we've got another question. What should I be looking for when I am selecting an agency to work with?
Oh, good question. So So I would say it comes back again to that relationship. You want to work with an agency that cares about the relationship with you and understanding what your needs are in the company. I think some of the biggest pain points we hear about with some recruiters or some agencies is that, you know, you only hear from them when they're looking to place someone or they're looking for the business. I think what's really important is making sure that relationship is getting built and that the individual that you're building that relationship with, or the agency you're building that relationship with, is making sure that they're staying up to speed on, you know, hey, what are key things coming up for you? And not from the perspective of, let me sell to you, but let me just have an understanding about what's coming up for you, and then knowing that you can reach out to them anytime. So something, you know, having someone that's accessible, having someone, again, that's focused on making sure they're building that relationship with you and they have a true desire to know how your organization works and the skills that you need so they can help you with that. And then I would say lastly, someone that's, you know, willing to go first. And that's a term we use all the time with our team, and making sure when they're going into companies that we're telling them, you know, listen, you go first. You provide as much as you can for the client, and then ultimately, you know, that'll create a better relationship, and that'll come back to you.
Great. That sounds good. I just want to remind our audience that we read all the feedback, so love to get your feedback on the presentation. And also, if you are interested in Candace, her information is on the screen right now, and it says, email me for a copy of my white paper. Tell us about that, Candace.
Absolutely. Sure. Thanks, Bobby. So I'm working on currently throughout the month of June, I've been doing a lot of research conversations and insights interviews, both with leaders at organizations that are running projects, as well as with practitioners inside of companies, to really get a better understanding about, you know, what are the pain points they've been feeling, what are things that are working really well for them, what do they see coming in their organizations that they know are going to be gaps for them. So based on all of that data that I'm gathering, I am putting together a white paper around that, and so would love to share that with any of you once I've completed that. We did make it a little easier too. If you can certainly email or reach out to me in any of these ways that you see on the screen. But over in the attachments and links, if you click there, it should take you to the contact page on my website. So there you can just fill in your information real quick, and even in the subject line, just write white paper. And then, you know, if you wanted to share a little bit about, you know, what you got out of today with me there too, I would love to see that. But if you just want the paper, you could just write white paper in the subject, and I'll make sure that gets out to you once we've completed that.
Great. So thank you so much for sharing, Candace. It's been really helpful. And again, this is the Innovation Women Speaks webinar series. If you're interested in learning more about Innovation Women, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter. You can go to innovationwomen.com, check it out. We are always looking for awesome speakers because we want to see more women on stage at conferences and events. And public speaking gets you visible. Visibility brings you opportunity. So thanks again, Candace Benson, and we will be back next week with another of our webinars. Thanks for attending.